All right. So we are on again, and this is pretty exciting for me because this chat right here marks the beginning of season 2 of daocast. And well, today there's somebody that I find very inspiring here. I've been following Raymond's work for a year or so now, and I think it brings a very unique perspective into governance, not only from his career as a developer, but also in terms of what he's envisioning and in terms of his work for HOLOCHAIN, which we'll get to know very, very soon. But I think it's worth connecting the dots here because daocast started, and I don't know if you know this, Raymond, but it started as a platform for discussions about DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. It comes from the blockchain movement, I would say, and more specifically, I had this idea while working for daostack, which is also, well, one of the companies building the technological infrastructure for DAOs. But quickly I realized that, this kind of conversations that I've been having, they go beyond technology, far beyond technology, let alone blockchain. So I am very happy I'm happy that there is a chance in this second season of daocast to explore those other realms of decentralized governance. I think that's a better way of framing it. So yeah, I think we're in a great way to start with you, Raymond. Just so for other people that might have listened to the show before, Stratis is not here. He's the other host at this moment, but he'll probably be in the other episode. So today it's on me. And yeah, with no further ado, welcome, Raymond. It's really nice to have you here. And yeah, I think it would be cool for everybody listening to us to maybe hear a little bit about you from yourself rather than me introducing you.
All right, sure. Yeah. Thanks for doing this. I'm glad to just wind me up, and I'll go for hours talking about any of this stuff. So,
absolutely
glad to be here. But yeah, I started programming in 1980 when I was 6 or 7 years old. So I got to win the career game right out of high school. I got hired as a programmer, and I could see this career in front of me, and that wasn't going to do it for me, working in the cubicle. And by my early 30s, kind of won the entrepreneur capitalist game. Found myself in having access to significant money that I had made, using programming skills and getting into some online marketing and doing some things, and got to experience firsthand. And really, it's a long story, but I ultimately came to realize money is not the answer to happiness. Does increase your freedom a bit, for sure. Makes more things open up and possible for you in the world. And if you do know what makes you happy, money can certainly help you achieve that. But money on its own is definitely the answer to happiness. So went in more of an internal journey, started investigating where money came from, due to Ron Paul, and from there kind of ended up getting in and becoming an activist and organizing a march around talking about money in the Federal Reserve and the military industrial complex and all of the things. Wow. About 10,000 people showed up in DC for a march I organized in 2008 called Revolution March. Myself and a group of others came together to make that happen. And so I kind of had this peak of success as an activist, and realized there wasn't going to be a political solution, it kind of, these days, the last few years, I've been able to converge all of these things, the ways, of making change in the world as an activist, using my technical skills, and figuring out how to sustain myself while doing that eventually, finally, It was many years of not sustaining myself in any way and swearing off money. And I kind of look back on it now as a subconscious vow of poverty I was on, to really, a subconscious vow of poverty that allowed me to really experience what life can be, for the disempowered, and found myself giving away all privilege without really consciously meaning to do that. But so these last few years I stumbled into, as I wanted to begin to look at the ways that people organize and the problems that seem to occur repeatedly when people organize. That's both in like tech startups as well as in the activist community. I started to see common patterns around money and power and lack of transparency seem to be some of the primary things. And so I started to think about how we could create new standard ways of interacting with each other in business and activism and life and community and intentional community. I have 3 children that I'm raising now, half the year. So it's very important to me to be an intentional community. So how do we bring this all together? How do humans cohesively organize themselves to create happiness for everybody? And I really started getting into that thought process and envisioning what an application to do that might look like. But it wasn't until Ethereum came along that it really took on a new level of excitement and possibility, that we now really have the ways to empower ourselves with DAOs, became the popular word, and cryptocurrency now really could be empowered outside of any kind of government constructs. And I started launching Ethereum contracts and just really was not super impressed. It's just like, this is not going to be the future of development. This can't be it. And so around that time, I came across HOLOCHAIN. Started to talk to Art Brock and some of the other team members, and joined them in 2017 in August at their Holo port, they called it, in San Francisco. And really just felt a very resonant sense with the team. I was really excited to be there. There was a little bit of an activist event, although not all of them are activists at all. But the need for the understanding of the need to change the way we coordinate at scale, especially in just the way humans are coordinating with each other, was definitely something that resonated with me. And these guys really, really had some really great thoughts on this going back 15 years when they started envisioning metacurrency. So I was asked to join the core development team, which was just such an honor. So I was with them to help launch the fundraiser, the Indiegogo campaign, which was a kind of a mode of determining demand in the marketplace for this new cryptocurrency they plan to launch called Holo Fuel. And then we launched an ICO based on the demand. We created the appropriate amount of supply. The ICO was very different than any other ICO. It was an ethical ICO, is what Art called it, and he wrote a 3-series article about that, and how the Holo ICO was completely different than any other ICO. It was called an initial community offering, in fact. And so it was just creating enough supply to meet the demand that was present and a little more, and then be able to create this ecosystem, this HOLOCHAIN ecosystem of application development environment that it creates, and a currency to do the microtransactions necessary when and if people choose to run HOLOCHAIN applications and want to serve them out to the world on a URL. There's a whole hosting network available for them to do that through the Holo network, which relies on the Holo Fuel currency as a currency to serve the microtransactions that happen. So every little time that one of the Holo hosts serves up CPU or uses its RAM or uses network capacity to serve a HOLOCHAIN application on behalf of a developer, there's a microtransaction that happens there. And so, that's my world. And once I felt like I really wanted to get back to building things on HOLOCHAIN, not working on HOLOCHAIN itself. And there was some restructuring in the team that happened when after the ICO was complete, and there was more of a definitely a necessity to get back to a kind of a command and control organizational methodology, which is not my style either. So it felt good at that time to get back to what I call the digital co-governance web, which is my original vision for what kind of standard interfaces we could start developing. And so I had lots of ideas about how governance could be done. Like, what would be some really cool ways to make decisions, and how can we build applications around that? And every time I would come up with something that I thought was the way, I would say, well, that's just one way, and there's a bunch of different ways. Who's to say that that's the best one? And so the problem that we're going to have is unless we go to the meta conversation and say, okay, there's lots of different ways to make decisions and lots of different ways to govern. How can we make sure that whatever we're doing, it's still compatible with everybody else, right? With all the other ideas out there in the free marketplace of ideas. Mm. And so that's where I started saying, okay, this is needed on HOLOCHAIN. If HOLOCHAIN is the protocol of protocols, then I'm going to create the governance protocol and suggest some ways to implement the meta currency ideas as a value identification and exchange protocols. So that's what I've laid out in a paper called the Digital Co-Governance Web. And then finally, I'm just getting ready to launch a new website for what I've called CoGov for short, which is
wow,
where we get to collectively govern the things that are there. And so it's just a meta layer. It doesn't propose exactly how we should govern ourselves. It doesn't propose how we should identify value. It doesn't propose how we should exchange value, but it does propose a protocol for how we can be transparent about how we decide to do those things and with who we're deciding to do it with. And of course, that's built on HOLOCHAIN.
Okay, that's a great way to start this conversation. You gave us a lot of things. As I was listening to you, a question came to my mind, but I have the feeling you kind of already answered it, but I'm going to repeat it out loud just for the sake of exploring it a little bit more. I'm not sure actually if we need to go into the details of how HOLOCHAIN works and how different it is from blockchain. I think for the sake of time, maybe our listeners can do their research elsewhere. But one thing that I do know about HOLOCHAIN is that it's agent-centric, right? It's much more focused on the interactions, the contextual interactions between agents rather than consensus overall as a rule of thumb, right? And so I've been wondering for a long time, and this is a question I've been keeping to ask somebody like you, what that means for governance. What that sort of structure, what that framework means for governance and for decentralized governance, because because it is a completely different. You standing in a completely different place when it comes to decision to decision making. And then I think you kind of started answering that question when you mentioned what you're working on right now, and the word that comes to my mind is interface. The way you describe what you're doing with digital CoGov, it's a protocol for interfaces of governance protocols, right? In the meta level things. Yeah. And I can see now how that fits into the HOLOCHAIN skeleton, if I may say. So, but I think, I'm sure you can explore that a bit more and maybe give us a little bit of the details of how that works.
Great. Yeah, cool. I have a really short article in terms of explaining HOLOCHAIN and Holo a bit, which I can share if you want to, make it part of this video.
Yeah, I can put on the footnotes. Yeah.
Yeah, but definitely everybody do your research. HOLOCHAIN is not just another blockchain implementation. It is there's more in that's different than there is in common. Really, the only thing shared in common is the idea about monotonic hash chains. Beyond that, there's really not much in common, other than it actually, HOLOCHAIN does propose to solve all of the same things that blockchain claimed it was going to be able to solve. It's just that the scalability issues with blockchain may be preventing that. And so your question as to what does it do for governance? And yeah, that's a great question, because in the agent centricity of it, to where it's not data centric, like like blockchain, where we have this global ledger that has all of the data, right? And that we all need to agree on exactly what that ledger must look like. That's a data-centric approach, and that takes a lot of time and energy, as we know. In case anybody doesn't know, Bitcoin mining right now is taking about 4/10 of the electricity usage of the entire planet, and growing, right? So this is not a small amount of energy we're talking about, and that's just Bitcoin. That's not Ethereum, and that's not EOS and everything else that's out there, which are all relatively running on Nakamoto consensus-based protocols, I believe. Yeah. So that takes a lot of energy in order to maintain that data-centric view of absolute certainty about the universe. And the truth about the universe is that there is no absolute certainty about anything, right? That's the reality. Every single conscious being has a 100% completely different perspective of the universe, right? So that's what we have to live with in reality. So biomimicry is at the core of HOLOCHAIN. Meaning just look what happens in nature and do your best to mimic that. And so since that's the truth about the universe, why do it any differently when it comes to digital implementations, digital tools? So every application, there are monotonic hash chains for that high degree of certainty that data has not been tampered with. Like that you can't go back in time and tamper with things in the past. But the way that data is shared among the peers running HoloChain applications is through the same technology that BitTorrent has been running on for years, for decades, in fact. And so that's a proven protocol of data sharing. And of course, we need a higher degree of validation in the HoloChain world. So we use that protocol, and we added a validation layer for the transactions that get put on there. So that changes governance in a way that it takes us from decentralized to truly distributed, which is a huge step. Because the reality about Nakamoto consensus and some of the other solutions out there, so Nakamoto consensus is there's a couple different methodologies out there, okay, besides that, but they all require some centralization to inherently happen. And so you have decentralized. You really literally go from centralized to decentralized, but you still have all the power. In the case of Nakamoto consensus, is with the miners. In the case of some other methodologies to doing it, the power still does concentrate, just differently, right? So when you have that concentration of power happening, you're always you may have heard of the 80-20 rule. So kind of that's another natural state of the universe, is that kind of anytime you create the ability for power to centralize, it will centralize. About 80% of the power will centralize in about 20% of the, physical representation, right? So power will centralize. And right now in Bitcoin, for instance, if the 3 biggest mining pools decided to merge, they would control more than 50% of the hash power of the network. And there you go. It's out the way. Everything that Bitcoin purported to be is out the window if that happens, right? So we'd have a fork, and we'd have another big drama thing going on, and we would have a version of Bitcoin that was essentially manageable and regulatable by these mining networks. So in the HoloChain environment, that is impossible. It is impossible for there to be a centralization of power. That's the way it's designed. And impossible is a big word. I understand that, right? But when you understand the technology and you drink the Kool-Aid, right, you finally understand it, and the light bulb goes on. There's no going back. You understand how at any time that there's an uncomfortable centralization of power happening, it's very easy for any minority group within that power structure to shift it and take and get their own power and start managing things and resources and assets in a different way. So that all applies to governance. There cannot be a central governance body of any kind, ever. And so that's what's important. Even when you look at, if you did a governance solution on Ethereum, again, you have the miners that could ultimately, in some games you could play with how mining happens, to where you could get more power inside of that. And there's not much anybody could do about it.
I see. Oh, yeah. Okay, so There's this article you wrote, and that was actually the article that got me thinking a lot about HoloChain. From I think something clicked on me when I read the article that got me interested in HoloChain, not only as a distributed computer technology, but as something that could actually show us really innovation in a way. And that is the article you wrote on HoloChain and collective intelligence. So why did that resonate so much with me? I think people who have been listening to this show might have realized that, but I'm fascinated by complexity theory and complexity science and emergent phenomena. All this really fascinates me. And there you hint at those things. In that article, you hint at complexity. You hint at something that I found very curious, which is the greater levels of complexity that are around us and that we need to sort through as we become more and more digital. And well, there's the narrative of the singularity. We don't really know if we're going there, but they're not wrong in saying that technological advancement is increasing exponentially. That to me is very clear. And there's one quote here I got, which I would be very happy if you could maybe explain a little bit more, because it's still, at least for me, it's still not so clear. So when you say HoloChain allows for rapid iterations of greater and greater levels of complexity, and then in parentheses, higher consciousness, to be curated, creating exactly the kind of feedback mechanisms that you find are necessary for discernment in this scenario of increasing technological advancement. How does HoloChain allows for that exactly? Like how do feedback loops happen in the HoloChain ecosystem? And again, what that means for governance. I think that's an interesting thing to explore as well.
All right, great question. Yeah. So if you're familiar with the game Go, it's very popular in Asian culture.
Yes.
And it's the level of complexity compared to the most in more Western circles. Chess is the most complicated game we know of, and we finally, Big Blue, like a decade ago, beat Kasparov at chess, so it beat the world champion chess player. But Go is a whole new level of complexity, like millions of times more complex, more possibilities of how the game can play out, and it's really an amazing intellectual art. And so there's a documentary out on Netflix about this, that they finally built an artificial intelligence that beat the world champion at Go. And the interesting thing about that is, though, they don't know why the computer made the moves it made to win the game. They can't explain it. And so to me, that's where we're getting on that, we're crossing that, like we're in the danger zone, right? When we're creating technology and we don't know why it did what it did. It can give us some interesting insight, granted, but I think that's where it can be dangerous. And so the idea to me is to always just take it a little bit slower, right? Just don't get to the point where it's a complete mystery. Have it do some analytics, have the technology to understand what's actually happening in the world, by being able to combine more data in more new ways than we've ever had before, and then have the conscious humans be able to take a look at that data and write the algorithms and write the formulas to analyze it in different ways. But in a sense that we can always be iterating that. And when we see that it's not quite working, we get new data, we get new information, we tweak it again. And so we're always in the loop of the growth of the complexity, right? It's always coming back to the conscious to ask us, is this the goal? Are we headed the right direction? Because it's only our deep conscious sense of love and truth and evolution that's guiding us at some level, right? And we don't know that we're going to create computers that can ever have that sense. And so are we going in the right direction? This needs to be asked at each level of complex iteration complexity. We need to ask the question, is this the right direction? Is this bringing us in a direction of love and oneness and community and goodness and, all the things that we all strive for in our physical 3D existence. And unless we're asking that question at each iteration, at each loop of complexity, I think we can get lost. And the next thing we know, we have runaway technology that thinks that somehow we've empowered as somehow being smarter than us at determining what we should be doing. Now, if it's what we should be doing in terms of the best way to accomplish the goals we know in our heart, then that's a good thing. But if it's the technology itself determining what we should be doing because it decided that's what we should be doing, I don't know. Something doesn't strike me as quite right about that.
Yeah.
And so HoloChain just definitely enables a means of having data being collected about things that are happening in the real world. So you talk about the Internet of Things. You talk about the whole proposal of that HoloChain is based on was the metacurrency idea, which is just that even if we had, let's assume we had benevolent dictators running the planet who really wanted the best and highest for all humanity and each individual and for everybody to be thriving, they simply wouldn't have the data they need to do that. And the reason they don't have that is because the data is not available, because we're only recording a very small segment of value exchange in the world, and that's the kind of value exchange that uses dollars, right? But who's recording the value in a hug? Mothers that raise children, or anything else we say in life, that's a good thing. I value that. We're not checking that. That's not going into analytics and figuring out how to deliver more of what people value to them. So the idea of metacurrency is let's start doing that. Let's identify the things that people value, and let's not even do that in a centralized manner. Let's create an environment where people can identify things they value and call that out, and then have a means that makes it very simple for digital technology to help them record the flows of exchange in that value. That's the idea of metacurrency. And in order to accomplish that vision, we needed what they called an unenclosable carrier to share those transactions, to share that valuation and that exchanges that are happening. And so that is what HoloChain is. It's the unenclosable carrier for metacurrency transactions. So ultimately, that's how we can start collecting a lot more data about the value, the things that people value in the world, the things that are bringing them happiness, the things that are bringing them connection and making lives better in a real way. We start to identify those values, see the flows that are happening in the ecosystem of those values, and then create means of bringing more of that value to more people more of the time. So that's kind of the goal. So we have a standard protocol. We have a standard. It's kind of like a universe. I see HoloChain as the universe, right? Because it can't be like it itself is not really enclosable in any way, right? But you can build things that are slightly enclosable within it, right? But they're never completely enclosable. They can always evolve and iterate. And so we're collecting all these data about things that are meaningful and valuable to people, and we'll have the ability to collect data and do the kind of analytics necessary to deliver more of that to people.
Okay, that makes things.
Did that answer your question? I hope so.
Yes. To me, yes. Yeah, it makes things more clear. Again, bringing together all the other things I've read and researched on HoloChain. That leads me to another question though. So when you say that with this unenclosable carrier, we can collect more data about what is contextually meaningful for people. How, and I imagine those are the flows you are talking about, right? How is that data being collected? Because I fear that we then will need to give numbers and quantify things that are not quantifiable. Is that the sort of data you're talking about? How does the hug I give to my mom, how does that go into this universe of HoloChain?
Yeah, good question. How can you put a value on a hug? I don't know, right? But we could try. right? I guess that's what's beautiful about the iteration. We can try to say, hey, let's call a hug worth 3 hug currencies. I don't know. And then, if you want to record that thing and it's important to you and your community just to record that kind of thing, hopefully make a really easy way to do it, right? And that's the idea. And so, yeah, and then when we would decide, this isn't quite working, hugs are getting overvalued in the marketplace somehow, let's adjust that algorithm. At least we have the transparent means to analyze what's actually happening and to see how and have talks about it. And not one central entity could ever tell you what the value of a hug is in the HOLOCHAIN ecosystem, right? There would never be some governmental authority that tells you what a hug is worth, right? So we just have this kind of nebulous idea that a hug does seem to have value to a lot of people a lot of the time, and we'll be able to measure that against all the other things that are happening in ways that make sense.
Okay. Yeah, well, that is a thing that I'm constantly thinking about, and the more I think about it, the more I tend towards not quantifying things that are purely qualitative. But I do understand the value of having something that would allow you to experiment with that, because then maybe you don't need to quantify a hug, but you can quantify other things, and that's when I think that's when I think things get interesting, because then that's when you really can play with ways of self-organizing, right? Ways of giving new dynamics to things, so you can hold value, so you can create value, so you can distribute value. That to me makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I imagine that's a little bit of what.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna say that I imagine that what CoGov is about is exactly that. It's allowing for this sort of experimentation at a protocol level, right? At a meta level, right?
Right. And so
the interface between different sort of governing mechanisms then on top of this program.
Yeah, this group over here values hugs, this group over here values sticks. I don't know, and they have some means of seeing what each other values. And what does that mean? We get to decide, right? But just bringing more transparency to what's actually happening and what things are valued. And I say all of this is, there's just something about the human journey that we've been doing, this very masculine journey, it seems like, of going out and achieving and conquering and building, and we're reaching our limits, right? Of that, we're about to destroy ourselves. We're about to destroy this planet if we continue on that track. So we're tapping into a more less consciously navigatable territory as we tap more into the feminine, right? And so I think as we reclaim our ability to do that, I think all the technology we need to operate in tribes and in tribes at scale on a global basis is all within us. I really believe that. And so my goal with all this is if it all does what it's supposed to do, we won't need CoGov, we won't need HOLOCHAIN, we won't need anything anymore, because we all have remembered our ability to act in ways that consider the whole, and we will be able to live on this planet without all these tools. But I think these tools are necessary right now to help the masculine part of us that's driving and growing and striving for achievement to remember the finer details and transition us back into that way of being. Self-terminating technology is what this is. We won't need it. If it does what it's supposed to do, we won't need it anymore.
That's really cool what you said. It brings me back to something I also highlighted from the article you wrote I mentioned, which is you asked something I find really amazing. Can we create technology that embodies a new way of life unless we have embodied a new way of life in the creation of the technology? I think that summarizes what you just described, and I find it very true as well. And honestly, that's a bit of my frustration with the decentralized movement in a way, because I don't think that other part of the loop happened. So it became, it's more of the same, but with ICOs or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, instead of the banksters, we had like the geeksters, you know, and they came along and they think, hey, look, we can create capital out of thin air now too, just like the banks have been doing all this time. And, you know, that was fun. I'm glad to see a distribution of power and wealth in the world. That was like a kind of a good step. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. It was not fundamentally breaking the patterns that have gotten us in this mess, right? It was not shifting us in a fundamental way out of that. And so, but it was a good indication of where we ought, like one way we could head with this. And again, it's kind of the difference between decentralized and distributed. Like if you look at distributed as like a mesh net, like every node talks to every other node, right? And so it's a very solid, evenly balanced, just like it kind of works itself out. The net just kind of works, right? And when you see it decentralized and you look at that in the map, it's not a stable, solid thing. It's, you know, a bunch of dots with a bunch of other dots surrounding each one, you know.
Yes.
It just doesn't provide that same sense of stability and all possibilities being open.
And life, I would say. Okay, I think we had a great one. There are many other questions that I have, but maybe we can keep that for another episode if you would accept coming back to talk to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it anytime. I enjoy this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're asking some great questions.
Yeah, I'm very interested in these things. And, you know, just so we bring it to an end, this last comment you made remind me of something that is constantly coming back to the conversations we're having in this show, which is culture. There's no real way to talk about technology without talking about culture and how these two feed back into each other. And in terms of distributed governance or decentralized governance, I am of the opinion that for those things to work, it's not about the technology that will be supporting that. It's about something else. It's about the if I may say, it's a terrible analogy because we're using computers to compare to describe living things, but it's about the software running on the brains.
Yeah, certainly. And, you know, our DNA is the most, you know, complex program here that we're even capable of starting to comprehend. But yeah, so it's about the culture that creates the technology is going to kind of continue itself. So there is definitely a personal transformational journey, right? You can't change the world, but you can change yourself. And in doing so, you probably do change the world, like that kind of thought. So I think that this whole layer of technology and all the things that are happening and the people that are interested in implementing this technology is that we're going to just create more transparency into the cultures that exist in the world, right? And we're going to be able to have a more rapid iteration as to what cultures are more successful ultimately. Like, reminds me a little bit of Guns, Germs, and Steel. So how, you know, it's an interesting analysis of the history of humanity on the planet and how, you know, technological advancements would cause one culture to wipe out another culture. And then we look back and, for instance, as the Europeans came to the Americas and kind of largely wiped out the indigenous cultures there. Now we're saying, hey, you know, maybe there was actually a whole lot we had to learn from those cultures. A whole lot that was good about the way they were living. And it can't take 400 years for us to come to those realizations anymore. We don't have enough.
We don't have it. Yeah, we don't have it.
Yeah. So I think that all this technology is enabling a rapid iteration of that kind of conscious evolution, right? So we can look at the little subcultures that are existing, and it allows new cultures to emerge because you can define your culture as a protocol and create digital apps very quickly that enact your culture. And now we get to look at that culture because we have a standard protocol of analysis on this stuff of culture, a protocol to analyze your culture, we can look at the cultures against each other and see what's actually creating that happiness, see what's actually creating regeneration and sustainability. We'll have the tools to actually do that analytics now. So, and then once we kind of get those answers and remind ourselves of what we already know, right, then we can just start to live, and hopefully, you know, not even need the technology at some point.
Awesome. All right, to bring this to an end, really, I'm just gonna put here what you define as consciousness, because I found it also clarifying, and it brings, I think, a nice ending to what we've been talking here. When you say in that article that consciousness is the ability of a being to recognize its participation in the patterns in which it exists. I think that puts it right, without any of the mystic or any of the unknown aspect of it. I think it's a simple way to frame it, and it makes a lot of sense to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, Raymond, it's been a pleasure, really. I am very grateful we managed to do this, that you could come, we could have this chat, and I'm really looking forward for a second one.
All right, let's do it. Yeah, I'm really honored. I'm really honored that you've taken the time to delve in and ask some great questions. And I'd look forward to, whether it's online or offline, learning more about you and what you're working on and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wanna maybe say how people can reach out to you, or maybe what's next for the CoGov, maybe also this might be a place for connections to happen, and that's one of the intentions behind the show as well.
Yeah, please do. Facebook's a good place. I hate to admit it, but it is. Junto is coming though. Junto is the social network built on HOLOCHAIN. So,
yes.
So definitely check that out. You can reach me on the HOLOCHAIN Mattermost chat server. It's chat.holochain.org. I'm Razor on there, Rayzer. I'm that everywhere. And CoGov.tech is the website where it's still just a really temporary holder, but there is a new one ready to launch very soon, which I will share with you offline.
Yes.
A preview of it. I'd love your feedback if I haven't already.
Awesome.
But, anybody who sees this, who wants to have a conversation about any of this, that's what I'm here to do. I love it. So
amazing. All right. Thank you very much. And thanks for all of you guys listening to this. This is second season of daocast. Started out really well. Thanks
all right. Thank you.